Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this an important hearing. In listening to the witnesses, I know there's been a lot of talk about Connolly's bill, but, I've got the one that goes just to the DOD. And I talked a little earlier about, my focus has to do with missile defense. That's what I'm on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee. This is a real issue in the missile defense industry. Ms. Speed, in your comments, you talked about Mr. Connolly's bill. Do you see any problems with the DOD pilot study that I'm proposing to nurture these mid-sized companies?
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Actually, no. We are in support of both approaches. In fact, whether it's DOD, GSA, or possibly even DHS, the idea is to allow these companies the ability to continue to be able to have the necessary infrastructure and resources without being restricted. I heard earlier of the disincentivizing of companies. I believe Mr. Frisbee made the point. Some companies are trying to do all they can to remain small. It's all about work and the employees that you have. Right. So we do support you and support your approach as well.
Okay. Ms. Dorfman, you made reference to the fact that size standards are being reviewed regularly and adjusted by the SBA. Not in the missile defense industry. They have not changed the size standards or the volume of revenue that you can generate in decades.
Well, then, if that's the case, then they obviously need to focus in on that. But we do need to adhere to the size standards. Otherwise, small businesses will be usurped by the larger businesses.
Well, here's what I'm trying to get at. We're not dealing with small businesses in my proposal. We're saying over and above what is set aside for small businesses. So, the concern that Mr. Frisbee had is not a concern in the bill that I proposed, because we aren't going to penetrate down into that 23%. This is over and above that. Because the truth is, Mr. Frisbee one day probably like to be a little bit bigger business, and then be able to nurture to that next level. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what's your opposition to my proposal.
Our focus is making sure that we get the emphasis on the small business goals. They need to be met, and that's our first
and I
concern.
agree with that. So what's your opposition with my proposal?
And so then the secondary nature is when we take a look at how to move forward. I agree we do have to help small businesses get to that next level, but in doing so, we feel that we have to make sure that there is a sound technique that is put in place, and that the small business size standards are included in that process because they have been there and they have worked.
Well, but my proposal is a pilot study. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a pilot study, is to find out where your bumps in the road is and what works and what doesn't. So why would you oppose a pilot study?
Again, we would like to see Congress work on making sure that the small business goals are being met, and I believe that the larger firms can access the contracts if they were put together in a way that was not in the bundling fashion where they're so large that they can't access them.
So you don't have any amendment language that you'd like to see incorporated that would make you happy. You're just against it. That's what you're saying. At
this point, yes.
So that's unreasonable. And as I've told Chairman Graves, I am open to any kind of an amendment that calms the concerns of any sector. But I'm not okay with just obstructionism. And that's what I'm hearing. Mr. Frisbee seems fine as long as his concerns are met. But it sounds like you're saying you don't care what concerns are met, you're against it. And that's a reasonable position, I guess, in your view, but it's not reasonable to me. And I'm hoping this committee will make any kind of changes you want to make. But we ought to at least look at nurturing these businesses up to this next level, particularly in missile defense, because this is serious stuff. And right now, when it comes to the big guys, Raytheon and Lockheed and Boeing, they don't have competition.
Will you yield?
We've got to get some
Would
folks.
the gentleman yield?
Absolutely.
Sure. Thank you for yielding. My question is, do you have small businesses that are basically, that grew and that are mid-size, and that you feel that they have problems with the size standard.
Absolutely. That's the problem.
So
they're being bought up once they go over 1,000 employees.
Two things could happen. One is that those businesses that feel that that the size standard needs to be changed or adjusted should apply to SBA to get that review. But also SBA, as we speak, are reviewing the size standard issue. So there's nothing that will prevent those businesses in your district to request SBA to look at the size standard issue.
I think the gentlelady, the fact is that gentleman right there would object to that if they wanted to raise that size standard so companies that went over 1,000 employees could now compete for this 23%. And the fact is the companies that and I don't represent them, I wish I did, but they're in Huntsville, can't get SBA to even consider those adjustments. So, I'm just trying to figure out how we can solve the problem, and I hope y'all work with me in any way, and I'm amenable to any kind of amendments y'all want to make. Thank you.